My mom and stepfather secretly stole money from the trust fund my dad left for my education for 8 years. When I found out about it, I didn't say a word to them, but the next day at their wedding party, they were arrested right in front of all the guests. So here I am, sharing this wild story that completely changed my life. My name's Zach, and let me tell you, sometimes life hits you with curveballs you never saw coming. I'm 17 now, but this whole mess started way back when I was just a kid. Growing up, my dad was literally everything to me. You know how some kids have Superman or Batman as their heroes. Well, my dad was mine. He wasn't some buff superhero or anything, just a regular guy who worked construction. But man, he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. He'd come home covered in dust and dirt, but he'd still throw me up in the air and catch me, making me laugh until my sides hurt. My mom, Sarah, though, that's where things get complicated. Even when Dad was alive, she was always distant. Like, imagine trying to hug a refrigerator. That's basically what hugging my mom felt like. She wasn't mean exactly, just cold as ice. Dad used to make excuses for her, saying she showed love differently. But even as a 9-year-old, I could tell something was off. Then everything changed when Dad got sick. Cancer hit him like a freight train, and within 6 months, he was gone. I still remember sitting in that hospital room, watching him get weaker every day. The worst part wasn't even losing him. It was watching my mom act like she was inconvenienced by the whole thing. While I was crying my eyes out, she was already talking about funeral arrangements and insurance policies. After Dad died, our house became like a morgue. Mom barely talked to me unless it was to tell me to do chores or complain about money. I spent most of my time in my room, looking through old photos of Dad and me, trying to remember what his laugh sounded like. Those were some dark times, man. For about 6 years, it was just the two of us living in this weird, cold bubble. I learned to cook my own meals, do my own laundry, basically raise myself. Mom worked at some office job and came home tired and grumpy every day. I kept thinking maybe she'd warm up eventually. Maybe we'd become closer after losing Dad together. Boy, was I wrong about that. Then came the day that changed everything again. I was 15, minding my own business, when Mom announced she was seeing someone. His name was Jim, and from the moment I met this guy, every alarm bell in my head started going off. Picture the most stereotypical deadbeat you can imagine. Beer gut, greasy hair, and that fake smile people use when they're trying to sell you something you don't want. Jim moved in faster than you could say red flag. Within 3 months, he was sprawled on our couch like he owned the place, drinking our sodas and leaving his dirty clothes everywhere. The guy didn't even pretend to work. He'd sleep until noon, watch TV all day, and then complain about dinner not being ready when Mom got home from her job. But here's where it gets really messed up. Mom was totally different around him. Remember how cold she was with me and Dad? Well, with Jim, she was like a completely different person. Suddenly, she was laughing at his stupid jokes, cooking his favorite meals, and basically acting like some lovesick teenager. It was disgusting to watch. The worst part was how Jim treated me. He'd make these little comments about how I was a burden, how I ate too much food, how I used too much electricity. Nothing Mom could hear, of course. He was smart enough to save his worst behavior for when she wasn't around. Sometimes he'd accidentally bump into me in the hallway, or he'd change the TV channel right when I was watching something. Petty stuff, but added up, I started spending more time out of the house, just walking around the neighborhood or hanging out at the library. Anything to avoid being home with Jim. That's actually how I started thinking seriously about college. I was at the library so much that I began looking at college brochures and websites, dreaming about getting out of there. The idea of college became my obsession. I'd spend hours researching schools, looking at programs, imagining myself walking across some campus far away from home. But there was one huge problem: money. Mom made it clear that she wasn't planning to help pay for my education, and with Jim sucking up all our resources, I knew I was on my own. So I did what any desperate teenager would do. I got a job. Actually, I got 2 jobs. During the school year, I worked at a local pizza place after classes, and during summers, I added a morning shift at a grocery store. My friends thought I was crazy, working so much while trying to keep up with school. But I had a goal. Every dollar I earned went straight into my college fund. I was careful about where I kept the money, too. I didn't trust banks. Seemed too complicated for a teenager. And I definitely didn't trust leaving it where Jim might find it. Instead, I kept it in this old wooden box that used to belong to my dad. It had his initials carved into the lid, and it felt like he was somehow protecting my dreams even after he was gone. The box lived in the back of my closet, hidden behind old clothes and shoes. Every week, I'd count the money, watching the pile grow slowly but steadily. 500, then 1,000, then 1,500. It wasn't much compared to what college actually cost, but it was mine, earned through sweat and sacrifice. By the time I turned 16, I had developed this whole routine. School, work, home, sleep, repeat. I barely had time for friends or fun, but I didn't care. Every dollar bill in that box represented freedom, represented a future where I wouldn't have to deal with Jim's snide comments or Mom's cold shoulder. My co-workers at the pizza place started calling me college boy because I talked about my plans so much. I had brochures for schools all over the country, California, Texas, New York, anywhere that was far enough away to start completely over. I even had backup plans for my backup plans. Community college if I couldn't afford a 4-year school. Trade programs if academics didn't work out. The funny thing is, during all this time, Mom never asked about my jobs or what I was saving for. She was too wrapped up in her new life with Jim to notice that her son was working himself to death trying to escape. Sometimes I wonder if she even cared that I was planning to leave, but honestly, I don't think she would have minded. Jim, on the other hand, definitely noticed my work ethic, but not in a good way. He'd make sarcastic comments about how I thought I was better than everyone else, how college was just a way to waste money and time. He'd tell Mom that I was getting too big for my britches, that I needed to be brought down a peg or two. Mom would just nod along, like she always did with everything Jim said. The tension in the house kept building. Jim got more comfortable being openly hostile toward me, and Mom got more distant. Some nights I'd lie in bed, listening to them talk about me like I wasn't even part of the family anymore. They'd discuss my future like it was some inconvenience they had to deal with, not like I was a real person with dreams and feelings. But I had my secret weapon, that box full of money growing bigger every month. By my 17th birthday, I had saved over $8,000. $8,000. It wasn't enough for 4 years at a fancy school, but it was enough to get started somewhere. I was so close to my goal that I could practically taste the freedom. That box represented everything to me. It was my ticket out, my proof that hard work pays off, my connection to Dad's memory. Every time I counted those bills, I felt like I was honoring his belief in me, showing that his son wasn't to give up or settle for less. I had it all planned out. Graduate high school in the spring, work full-time during the summer to save even more, then head off to college in the fall. I'd already started filling out applications, writing essays about overcoming adversity and working toward my dreams. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. I thought the hardest part was over, that I'd already survived the worst life could throw at me. I had no idea that the real betrayal, the one that would shake my faith in everything I believed about family and trust, was still coming. The box that represented all my hopes and dreams was about to become the center of the biggest heartbreak of my life. But trust me, you're not going to believe what happened next. So there I was, 17 years old with $8,000 saved up and dreams bigger than Texas. I had been working my butt off for 2 years straight, living on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, eating nothing but ramen and whatever free food I could get from work. Every single dollar in that box represented hours of dealing with cranky customers, mopping floors, and missing out on being a normal teenager. I remember the exact day everything went sideways. It was a Tuesday in March, and I had just gotten home from my evening shift at the pizza place. My boss had actually complimented my work that night, saying I was the most reliable employee he'd ever had. I was feeling pretty good about myself, thinking about how I only needed to save another couple thousand to really have a solid foundation for college. I walked into my room, exhausted as usual, and decided to count my money before bed. It was this little ritual I had. Counting the bills always made me feel like I was making real progress toward my goal. I reached into my closet, pushed aside the old clothes, and grabbed for the wooden box. The moment I picked it up, I knew something was wrong. The box felt way too light. You know that sick feeling you get in your stomach when you realize something terrible has happened? That's exactly what hit me. My hand was shaking as I opened the lid, praying that maybe I was just imagining things. Empty. Completely empty. Not a single dollar bill left. I must have stared at that empty box for 5 minutes straight, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? Maybe I had moved the money somewhere else and forgotten about it. But deep down, I knew exactly what had happened. I tore my room apart looking for that money. Checked every drawer, every pocket, on the bed, behind furniture. Nothing. Then I searched the whole house like a crazy person, hoping maybe someone had moved it for safekeeping. Still nothing. By this point, I was hyperventilating and my vision was getting blurry. When Mom got home from work around 11 that night, I was sitting in the living room with the empty box in my hands, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. She took one look at me and immediately got defensive, which told me everything I needed to know about who was responsible. I asked her straight up what happened to my money. No beating around the bush, no accusations, just a simple question. Her response? She shrugged like it was no big deal and told me that Jim had taken it for a down payment on a new truck. $8,000 of my hard-earned money. Gone just like that. The way she said it was what really got to me. Like it was the most natural thing in the world for her boyfriend to steal from her son. She explained it like Jim was doing me some kind of favor, saying the truck would benefit the whole family, and that I was being selfish for getting upset about it. I completely lost it. Started yelling about how that was my college money, my future, my escape plan. Every dollar represented hours of my life that I'd never get back. I told her about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the times I'd chosen work over friends, all the dreams I'd built around that money. Mom just stood there looking annoyed, like I was throwing a tantrum over nothing. When I finally stopped shouting, she told me to shut up and deal with it, said I was 17 years old and needed to learn that life isn't fair. Then she had the nerve to suggest I should be grateful that Jim was contributing to the household by getting reliable transportation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman, who was supposed to protect me and support my dreams, was defending the man who had just stolen my entire future. I asked her how she could let this happen, how she could choose Jim over her own son. Her answer broke something inside me. She said Jim was her partner now, and partners make decisions together, that I was almost an adult anyway and needed to start figuring things out for myself, that the money was just sitting there doing nothing. So Jim put it to good use, just sitting there doing nothing. 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears, and she called it nothing. I locked myself in my room and didn't come out for 3 days. Called in sick to both my jobs, ignored everyone who tried to contact me. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how my life had gone so completely off the rails. The worst part was realizing how powerless I was. I was still a minor, living in their house, with no legal recourse. I couldn't call the police because technically Jim hadn't stolen from a stranger. He'd taken money from his household. I couldn't move out because I had nowhere to go and no money to rent a place. My college applications were due in a few weeks, and suddenly I had no way to pay the fees, let alone tuition. All those essays I'd written about overcoming adversity and working toward my dreams seemed like cruel jokes now. I was trapped, and Jim and Mom knew it. Jim started acting even more smug after that, walking around like he owned the place. Would make comments about his nice new truck, how reliable it was, how smart he'd been to invest the money wisely. The man was practically gloating about destroying my future. I tried talking to some relatives on Mom's side, thinking maybe someone would help me out or at least understand what had happened. Big mistake. They all took Mom's side, saying I was being dramatic and that family helps family. Apparently, stealing from your own kid counts as family help in their twisted worldview. My friends at school started noticing that something was wrong. I'd gone from being this focused, driven guy with clear goals to being a zombie who barely spoke to anyone. My grades started slipping because I couldn't concentrate on anything. What was the point of studying for AP tests when I had no way to pay for college anyway? The guidance counselor pulled me aside one day, concerned about my sudden change in behavior. I thought about telling her everything, but what could she really do? Call social services on my mom for letting her boyfriend spend my college fund? It seemed hopeless. That's when I remembered something Dad used to tell me about his father, my Grandpa Jack. Dad always said his old man was the most stubborn, principled person he'd ever known. Someone who believed in doing the right thing no matter what it cost. Dad had been estranged from Grandpa Jack for years before I was born. Some family drama I never fully understood. But desperate times call for desperate measures, right? I figured I had nothing left to lose. So I decided to reach out to the one person who might actually understand what I was going through. Maybe Grandpa Jack would have some advice, or maybe he'd at least listen to my story without taking Jim's side. I found his phone number in Dad's old address book and spent about an hour working up the courage to call him. What was the worst thing that could happen? He could hang up on me, tell me he wanted nothing to do with our family drama, or just ignore me completely. But something told me this phone call was going to change everything. I had no idea just how right I was about that, or how much more complicated this whole situation was about to become. Sometimes when you think you've hit rock bottom, life opens up a trapdoor and shows you there's a whole other level of crazy waiting underneath. And trust me, what I was about to discover would make Jim stealing my college fund seem like pocket change. Making that phone call to Grandpa Jack was honestly one of the scariest things I'd ever done. I had spoken to this man maybe 3 times in my entire life. Always awkward holiday conversations where Dad would force us to talk. But here I was, 17 and desperate, dialing his number like he was my last hope on earth. The phone rang 4 times before this gruff voice answered. Grandpa Jack sounded exactly like I remembered. Rough around the edges, but somehow solid, like someone you'd count on in a crisis. When I told him who I was, there was this long pause, and for a second I thought he might hang up on me. Instead, he asked me how I was doing and if everything was okay. Just those simple questions made me want to cry, because honestly, no adult had asked me that in years. I started explaining the whole situation. Dad's death, Mom's coldness, Jim moving in, my college savings disappearing overnight. Grandpa Jack listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished my story, there was another long silence. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He asked me if I knew anything about the trust fund my dad had set up for me. Trust fund? What trust fund? That's when Grandpa Jack dropped the biggest bombshell in my life. Apparently, when Dad got his cancer diagnosis, he didn't just sit around feeling sorry for himself. He worked with a lawyer to set up an education trust fund for me, worth $500,000. $500,000. That's $500,000 that was supposed to be mine when I turned 21. I literally had to sit down on the floor because my legs stopped working. All this time I've been scraping together $8,000 like it was some huge fortune, and there was $500,000 sitting somewhere with my name on it. But if that was true, why was I working 2 jobs and living on ramen noodles? Grandpa Jack explained that the trust was managed by Mom as the surviving parent until I reached adulthood. She was supposed to use it only for my education and well-being, and only in emergencies. The bulk of the money was meant to guarantee I could go to any college I wanted without worrying about debt. My head was spinning trying to process all this information. I asked him why no one had ever told me about it, why I'd been living like we were broke when there was all this money just sitting there. His answer made me physically sick. He said he'd tried to stay involved after Dad died, wanted to make sure I knew about my inheritance eventually. But Mom had completely cut off contact with Dad's family, claiming we needed space to grieve. She'd refused his calls, returned his letters, and made it impossible for him to have any relationship with me. What he didn't know until recently was that she'd been systematically lying to him about the trust fund status. Here's where it gets really messed up, though. Grandpa Jack explained that he'd been trying to check on the trust fund for years, but legally, he had no access to the account information. As the surviving parent, Mom was the sole trustee until I turned 21. The bank couldn't share details with him, and Mom had been sending him fake annual reports showing everything was fine. It wasn't until 6 months ago that he finally got suspicious enough to hire a private investigator. Something about Mom's attitude during a brief phone call had set off alarm bells. She'd been too eager to end the conversation when he asked general questions about my college plans. That's when he discovered the truth about what they'd been doing. Mom and Jim had been living off my inheritance like it was their personal piggy bank. The down payment on their house, my money, Mom's new car, my money, Jim's gambling debts, my money, that fancy vacation they took to Mexico last summer while I was working double shifts. You guessed it, my money, according to the investigator. There was maybe $50,000 left in an account that should have contained $500,000. $450,000 of my future had been stolen by the two people I trusted most in the world. Well, the two people I was supposed to be able to trust anyway. I was hyperventilating at this point, trying to wrap my brain around the sheer scale of the betrayal. The $8,000 Jim had stolen from my closet was just the tip of the iceberg. These people had been robbing me blind for years, and I'd been completely clueless about it. Grandpa Jack could hear how upset I was and started talking me through what needed to happen next. First, he was going to overnight me copies of all the legal documents related to the trust fund. Second, we were going to contact a lawyer who had originally set everything up. Third, we were going to call the police and file charges for embezzlement and theft. The lawyer part scared me a little because I'd never dealt with anything legal before, but Grandpa Jack assured me he'd handle all the complicated stuff. He said Dad had chosen him as a backup trustee specifically for situations like this, so he had legal standing to take action on my behalf. That night, I barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about all the times Mom had complained about money, all the sacrifices I'd made thinking we were struggling financially. She let me work myself to exhaustion while she was literally sitting on a fortune that belonged to me. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived via overnight delivery. Inside were bank statements, legal documents, and a detailed report from the private investigator. Seeing it all laid out in black and white was somehow even worse than just hearing about it over the phone. The bank statement showed regular withdrawals over 3 years, always for amounts just under the reporting threshold that would trigger automatic reviews. Mom and Jim had been smart about it, taking the money in chunks that wouldn't raise red flags with the bank. But added up over time, it was a staggering amount of theft. Reading through the investigator's report felt like discovering that my entire life had been a lie. There were receipts for luxury purchases, documentation of gambling losses, evidence of a lifestyle that was completely funded by money meant for my education. They'd even used my trust fund to pay for their wedding ceremony. The most disgusting part was finding out that Jim had known about the money from the very beginning. This wasn't some crime of opportunity. He'd targeted Mom specifically because she had access to my inheritance. The whole relationship had been a long con designed to steal from a kid whose father had died. I called Grandpa Jack back and told him I was ready to move forward with legal action. He said he'd already spoken to the lawyer and that we had a strong case. Embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and probably a dozen other charges that could land both Mom and Jim in serious legal trouble. The hardest part was waiting for everything to be put in motion. I had to go to school and pretend everything was normal while knowing that my entire world was about to explode. I had to sit at the dinner table with two people who had stolen nearly $500,000 from me, listening to them complain about bills and talk about their future plans. Jim had the nerve to mention that he was thinking about getting a newer truck, maybe something with better gas mileage. I almost choked on my food listening to him casually discuss spending more of my money. The level of entitlement was just mind-blowing. Mom kept asking me why I seemed so quiet and distant lately, if something was bothering me at school or work. The fake concern in her voice made me want to scream. She was sitting there pretending to care about my well-being while actively destroying my future behind my back. Grandpa Jack called me every day to update me on the progress. The lawyer was preparing all the necessary paperwork, and they were coordinating with law enforcement to make sure everything was handled properly. He kept reassuring me that justice was coming, that these people weren't going to get away with what they'd done. But honestly, part of me was terrified about what would happen next. These were still the only family I had left, even if they were terrible people. Once the legal hammer dropped, there would be no going back, no pretending everything was okay. I was about to destroy what was left of my family, even though they destroyed my trust first. The countdown had begun, and soon Mom and Jim would discover that you can't steal from someone's future without eventually paying the price. What they didn't know was that their judgment day was coming faster than they could possibly imagine, and it was going to be absolutely devastating. The waiting was absolutely killing me. For 2 weeks, I walked around knowing that legal papers were being filed and investigations were happening, but Mom and Jim had no clue what was coming their way. It was like watching a disaster movie where you can see the tsunami building offshore, but the people on the beach are just enjoying their vacation. Grandpa Jack kept me updated on everything behind the scenes. The lawyer had filed all the necessary motions. The bank had frozen what was left of my trust fund, and the district attorney was reviewing the case for criminal charges. Everything was moving forward, but legal stuff takes time, and patience has never been my strong suit. The weird part was how normal Mom and Jim were acting during this whole period. They were actually in great moods, talking about some big party they wanted to throw to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. Mom was researching catering companies and party venues like she had unlimited money to spend, which, I guess from their perspective, they did. They still thought they had access to my trust fund. Jim had become even more obnoxious than usual, bragging to anyone who would listen about his business ideas and investment plans. He'd apparently convinced himself that he was some kind of financial genius who could turn money into more money. The irony was painful. Here was this guy talking about smart investments while he'd blown $400,000 of someone else's money on trucks, vacations, and poker games. The breaking point for me was when I overheard them planning to take out another large withdrawal from the trust fund to pay for their anniversary party. They were talking about spending $15,000 on one night of celebration, using money that was supposed to pay for my college education. That's when I knew the timing was absolutely perfect for what was about to happen. Grandpa Jack called me 3 days before their anniversary party with the news I'd been waiting for. The arrest warrants had been issued, and everything was ready to go. He asked me if I wanted to be there when it happened, or if I preferred to be somewhere else. I told him I wouldn't miss it for the world. The plan was beautifully orchestrated. Mom and Jim had rented out a small banquet hall for their anniversary celebration, invited about 50 people, and spared no expense on decorations, food, and music. They were so proud of themselves, acting like some kind of power couple who had everything figured out. I showed up to the party acting completely normal, even helped them set up some of the decorations earlier in the day. It was honestly difficult to look at their happy faces knowing what was about to happen, but I kept reminding myself of all the betrayal, all the stolen dreams, all the lies they'd built their relationship on. The party started at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening. By 7:30, the place was packed with friends, neighbors, and relatives all celebrating this wonderful couple and their amazing love story. Mom gave a speech about how she'd found her soulmate and how grateful she was for Jim bringing stability and joy back into her life. The whole thing made me want to throw up. At exactly 8 o'clock, just as they were about to cut their anniversary cake, 3 police officers walked through the front door of the banquet hall. The room went completely silent. You know that moment in movies where the record scratch happens and everyone freezes? That's exactly what this felt like. The lead officer asked for Sarah Matthews and James Morrison to identify themselves. Mom and Jim looked confused at first, probably thinking there was some mistake, or maybe a noise complaint from neighbors. When they raised their hands, the officer announced that they were under arrest for embezzlement, theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The sound that came out of Mom when they put the handcuffs on her was something I'll never forget. It was like a wounded animal, this combination of shock, fear, and absolute disbelief. She kept saying there had to be some mistake, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that someone needed to call a lawyer immediately. Jim, on the other hand, went straight into rage mode, started yelling about police harassment, demanding to see warrants, threatening to sue everyone involved. The officers handled him professionally, but you could tell they were enjoying shutting down this loudmouth who thought he was above the law. The best part was watching the faces of all their party guests. These people had come to celebrate what they thought was a successful, happy couple, and instead they were witnessing a public arrest for stealing from a teenager. The whispers started immediately. People pulling out phones, taking pictures, asking each other what was happening. Mom caught sight of me in the crowd, and something in her eyes changed. You could see the exact moment when she realized I was involved in this somehow, that her own son had played a role in her downfall. She started screaming at me across the room, calling me ungrateful, saying I was destroying the family, asking how I could do this to her. That's when one of the officers explained to everyone present what Mom and Jim had been arrested for: embezzling nearly $500,000 from a minor's education trust fund. Using money meant for a kid's college education to fund their lifestyle, their wedding, their vacations, and Jim's gambling habits. The mood in that room shifted instantly. These people had been celebrating what they thought was a heartwarming love story, but now they realized they were looking at two criminals who had stolen from a child. Some of the guests started leaving immediately, clearly wanting nothing to do with the situation. Jim's family looked absolutely mortified. His brother actually came over to apologize to me, saying they had no idea what Jim had been doing and that they would have stopped him if they'd known. Mom's relatives were split. Some looked ashamed. Others seemed angry that I'd chosen to prosecute family members. As the police were leading Mom and Jim toward the door, Mom made one last desperate attempt to manipulate the situation. She started crying and begging me to tell the officers it was all a misunderstanding, that we could work everything out as a family, that she was sorry and would pay back every penny. Too little, too late. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her that she'd made her choice when she decided to steal my future, that I'd given her every opportunity to be a real mother, and she'd chosen Jim and his lifestyle over her own son. The look on her face when she realized I wasn't going to save her was absolutely priceless. The police cars drove away with my mom and Jim in the back seats, leaving behind a room full of confused guests and the ruins of what was supposed to be a celebration. I helped clean up the decorations and pack away the uneaten cake, but honestly, I felt like celebrating myself. Grandpa Jack showed up about an hour later to pick me up and make sure I was okay. He'd been waiting nearby during the whole arrest, ready to step in if I needed support. Seeing him there, having someone actually care about my well-being, made me realize how alone I'd been for so many years. The local news picked up the story within a few days. Local couple arrested for embezzling dead father's trust fund. Made for a pretty sensational headline. Mom and Jim's mugshots were all over social media, and suddenly everyone in town knew what they'd done. The court of public opinion can be harsh, and these two were about to discover just how harsh. But for me, for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. Justice was finally being served. The truth was out in the open, and my future was back in my own hands. The nightmare was far from over, but at least now I wasn't facing it alone. The aftermath of that arrest was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Within 48 hours, Mom and Jim were both out on bail, but their lives were completely destroyed. The story had spread through our small town faster than wildfire, and suddenly everyone knew exactly what kind of people they really were. Mom tried calling me dozens of times from jail, then from whatever lawyer's office she could find. I didn't answer a single call. What was there to talk about? She'd had years to come clean, years to do the right thing, and instead she'd chosen to double down on the lies and theft. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. With all the documentation Grandpa Jack's investigator had gathered, plus the bank records and paper trail, this wasn't exactly a complicated case. Mom and Jim had left evidence of their crimes everywhere. They'd been so confident they'd never get caught that they hadn't even tried to cover their tracks properly. Jim ended up pleading guilty to avoid a longer sentence, probably hoping to save his own skin by cooperating with prosecutors. He got 3 years in state prison plus restitution requirements. Mom fought the charges initially, hiring some expensive lawyer with money she probably didn't have, but eventually took a plea deal too. 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, and a lifetime ban from managing anyone else's financial affairs. The restitution part was tricky because most of the money was simply gone. You can't get blood from a stone, and Jim had gambled away or spent most of what they'd stolen. The court ordered them to pay back everything they could, but realistically, I knew I'd never see most of that money again. Fortunately, there was still about $60,000 left in the trust fund, plus the lawyer was able to recover some assets. They seized Jim's truck, some jewelry Mom had bought, and forced them to sell the house they'd bought with my money. When everything was tallied up, I ended up with about $120,000. Not the original $500,000, but enough to completely change my life. The hardest part wasn't the legal stuff, or even losing the money. It was coming to terms with the fact that I truly had no family left. Mom's relatives mostly took her side, buying into some narrative she created about me being an ungrateful son who destroyed the family. A few of them reached out to try to mediate, suggesting I should forgive and forget, but I was done with that whole toxic dynamic. Jim's family was actually more supportive than Mom's. His brother called to apologize again and offered to help me get settled somewhere new. They were genuinely horrified by what he'd done and wanted to make sure I knew they didn't condone his actions. It was weird getting more compassion from the criminal's family than from my own relatives. Grandpa Jack became my lifeline during this whole transition. He helped me navigate all the legal paperwork, made sure I understood my financial options, and most importantly, gave me the emotional support I'd been missing for years. Having someone actually care about my future and well-being was a completely foreign experience. The decision to leave town completely was easy. There was nothing keeping me there except bad memories and people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. Grandpa Jack suggested I consider moving somewhere with good universities and opportunities for young people. After researching different options, I decided on California, specifically the San Diego area. The climate was perfect. There were several excellent colleges nearby, and it was literally as far as I could get from my old life while staying in the same country. I found a small apartment near UC San Diego, enrolled in community college to get my bearings, and started completely over with a clean slate. Those first few months in California were simultaneously the scariest and most liberating time of my life. I'd never lived alone, never managed my own finances beyond saving for college, never had to navigate adult responsibilities without some kind of safety net. But I was finally free from all the toxicity and drama that had defined my teenage years. Community college turned out to be exactly what I needed. The professors were supportive, the other students were focused on actually learning, and nobody knew anything about my family drama back home. I could just be Zach the student, not Zach whose mom stole his college fund, or Zach whose family fell apart in the most public way possible. My grades were excellent, mostly because I actually had time to focus on studying instead of working 2 jobs to survive. With my living expenses covered and no family emergencies draining my resources, I could dedicate myself completely to education for the first time in my life. After 2 years at community college, I transferred to UC San Diego to finish my bachelor's degree in business administration. The plan was to eventually start my own company, maybe something in real estate or financial consulting. I figure my personal experience with financial betrayal had taught me more about protecting assets than most business school graduates ever learn. The transformation in my mental health was dramatic. For years, I've been carrying around this constant stress about money, family drama, and an uncertain future. Suddenly, all of that weight was gone. I could sleep through the night without worrying about bills. I could make friends without being embarrassed about my home situation. I could plan for the future with actual optimism. I did try therapy for a while, mostly to process all the betrayal and abandonment issues. The counselor helped me understand that what Mom and Jim had done wasn't just theft. It was a profound violation of trust that had affected my ability to rely on other people. Working through those feelings was difficult, but necessary for moving forward. Dating was complicated at first because I had major trust issues, especially around money and family dynamics. How do you explain to someone that your own mother stole your inheritance and you had her arrested? Most people couldn't relate to that level of family dysfunction, which was actually refreshing in its own way. I never heard from Mom again after the initial flood of phone calls from jail. No birthday cards, no holiday messages, no attempts to reconcile or apologize. Part of me wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done, if she ever missed having a relationship with her son. But honestly, I stopped caring about her feelings pretty quickly. Jim sent me a letter from prison about a year after his sentencing, some rambling apology where he tried to take responsibility for his actions while also making excuses about gambling addiction and financial pressure. I read it once, then threw it away without responding. Some people don't deserve forgiveness, and some apologies come too late to matter. The extended family drama continued for a while. Occasionally, one of Mom's relatives would track down my new phone number and try to guilt me into reconciling with her. They'd always frame it as being the bigger person or honoring Dad's memory by keeping the family together. I finally had to change my number and make it clear that contact was welcome. 3 years after moving to California, I graduated with honors and landed a great job at a financial planning firm. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was helping other people protect and grow their money, using skills I developed from being victimized by financial criminals. My personal story became a powerful tool for connecting with clients who'd experienced similar betrayals. Eventually, I started my own practice specializing in estate planning and asset protection for families with trust issues. Business was surprisingly good. Turns out there are a lot of people out there who've been burned by relatives and want to make sure their money goes where they intended it to go. I bought a house with an ocean view, got engaged to an amazing woman who understood my complicated past, and built the kind of life I'd only dreamed about during those dark years working 2 jobs and saving every penny. The American dream is real, but sometimes you have to cut out the people trying to sabotage it. So that's my story, folks. Sometimes life hits you with challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But if you stay focused on your goals and don't let other people's selfishness define your future, amazing things can happen. What do you think about this whole crazy situation? Have you ever had family members betray your trust in major ways? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me reach more people who might need to hear that it's possible to overcome even the worst family drama. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next video.